All right, this is my first time using this setup outside, so hopefully this microphone sounds good. But there's one book that everybody in the preparation should read, should be required reading. I can't remember if we have it as required reading or optional reading within the preparation, but it should be required. I've read this book. It's called The Education of a Wandering Man by Louis L'Amour 5 or 6 times in the last 4 years, and I think two or three of those have been within the last 2 years. It's a massively important book for people within the preparation. But on top of that, it's just great storytelling, great writing. It's a memoir about Louis's life. And if you don't know who Louis L'Amour is, he is best known for being an amazing writer. He sold over 300 million copies, 300 million copies of his books, which were mainly westerns. That was the genre he succeeded in. And in fact, I have his entire, it's called the Sackett's series or Sackett series. I have all 18 books on my bookshelf in there, actually. It's fantastic and hugely important for all young men to read because they're morality stories, really, which I guess all westerns are, at least most of them are morality tales. So for that reason alone, it's worth reading Louis L'Amour. But Education of a Wandering Man is a memoir about. It's kind of skimming over, going into detail in a few spots, but skimming over the story of his life, starting from when he was 14 years old and left his family in North Dakota to go find work. And this was just before the Great Depression. But it led on through the Great Depression when he was still hoboing around on train cars, on rail cars, or traveling by sea to either from because he was working on a boat or to just go and travel somewhere new. I mean, this guy had such an amazing life. He was a cattle skinner on a ranch in Texas, just skinning cattle all day, every day. He was a caretaker of a mine where he met some like really strange old Indian man, and the owner of the mine actually told him to be careful and watch out for this old Indian who he said would might kill Louis if Louis did the wrong thing. Louis worked as a longshoreman, as a lumberjack. He was in the circus for a little while, and I believe he was also shipwrecked at one point. He had such a an odd, interesting life, and I think a the life of a Renaissance man, where he had the academics, which he got from reading. He was a prolific reader, even in his early teens, and actually when he was a kid as well, his family was all about reading. But he also had the real life skills, the practical skills that every Renaissance man has, that he got from doing all these wild things that I listed throughout his life. I mean, you get a huge list of skills from working on a boat. You get a list of skills as a longshoreman. You get a list of skills as being a lumberjack, from skinning cattle, from being caretaker of a mine. I mean, everything he did, he gained new and interesting skills and skills that he could bring on to the next job. So, for that reason alone, it's worth reading this book, Education of a Wandering Man. But there's also three major reasons why I want you to read this book, especially if you are in the preparation. And the number one reason why you should read it is because you want to use it as a gauge of your success, or at least a gauge of your progress. Gauge of progress is a better word than gauge of success, because when I've read this book throughout the last 2 years, after reading it several times, I walk away with a new perspective of Louis' story. You know, instead of having kind of this fantastical view of it, and I mean fantastical in the truest sense of the word, where I look at the story of his life and I go, oh my God, it must have been amazing. Must have been such an adventure all the time, all day, every day. You know, of course, there were periods that were rough, lots of hard work, but it must have been so fun. And that was kind of the ignorant view. I think the view that you are inevitably going to start off from, of just looking at it in a childlike way. And then now, after reading it several times over, after experiencing a lot of different things like sailing in the Falklands, learning how to sail in the Falklands, working on wildfires, becoming an EMT, being apprenticed to an Uruguayan gaucho, I mean, a number of things, I walk away with an interesting perspective where I can understand what Louis would have felt like within certain situations. Like, I worked on a geophysics crew in Nevada for a couple of weeks, and I can understand now when Louis talks about being stranded. I think it was also in Nevada, in the desert of Nevada, and I can understand when he's telling that story of having to walk from the mine he was working at into a town about 30 miles away. I can understand what the heat would have felt like. I would have understand how much he was sweating. I can understand just how much it would have sucked to walk long distances throughout the desert. Like I can feel it in a way that I couldn't feel it before. I can understand it in a different light. And that's been helpful because it gives me a perspective of where I'm at. And it even though it sounds like it's taking away from the adventure and the fun and like even though it seems like there could be less interest in doing interesting things, adventurous things, it actually makes it enriches it. Getting the true experience enriches it all. It makes you look at life through a new set of eyes, actually. But this is something I'll talk about more in a minute. Once you read this book several times over, and I think you should read it once a year, you will walk away with a new perspective every time. And you should pay attention to how you view it differently. You should pay attention to how you view it the first time, like what emotions the stories evoke within you. And you should pay attention to how it makes you feel the second, third, and fourth time you read it, because I guarantee it'll be very different. And you should understand why it's changed, how you feel, because I think you'll get to see that, again, nothing is taken away from the stories, your experiences, which will be, there will be plenty of mistakes within all the experiences you have within the preparation. You'll make plenty of mistakes. You'll have some failures. You'll undoubtedly walk into circumstances that you probably wish you wouldn't have walked into, but that's just part of life. But once you do that, you will gain a new perspective, and I think that perspective can be more easily seen after reading the book, because you are reading an account from the man who lived an interesting life, lived the life of a more modern Renaissance man during a time similar to ours. I think the reason why I prefer to pay a bit more attention in some cases to Louis L'Amour as a Renaissance man than I do to Ben Franklin or to Kit Carson is because Kit Carson's time or Ben Franklin's time was much different than the time of the Great Depression that Louis L'Amour grew up in and had to go out into the world and experience in a tumultuous time and a time of great difficulty and suffering. And I think that time is much more similar to the time we have now, where, you have the crazy inflation of the dollar, you have the standard of living dropping dramatically over very short periods of time, you have the threat of potential war with numerous world powers, and you also have the ever growing distrust of institutions and corporations and major political figures. I mean, I doubt there was, at least to the same scale, I doubt there was an Epstein in 1930. There might have been. At least he wasn't known. But it's better to use Louis L'Amour's time because during Ben Franklin's time or Kit Carson's time, at least in the eastern United States, things were more settled and you could more easily predict the trajectory of a person's life because there were things like apprenticeships where they were actually much more harsh than people think, and I'll talk about this more in the future because I think uh, apprenticeships, at least the idea of apprenticeships, are glorified in a way that they shouldn't be. I don't think people understand what they're actually like. But the just the fact that there were apprenticeships back in the day, back in their time, and that they were more regular. It was normal for a family to give up their child to a master for them to be apprentice under them and to work under them for what was it, 6 years at least. And that just shows that there was a more linear trajectory of life, that you went into something and you were going to stick in that one thing for the rest of your life. Whereas in Louis' time, people weren't sure what the next day would hold. People weren't sure if they were going to be able to eat the next day, or if the guy who they were employed by, picking apples from his orchard for 12 hours a day, if he was going to keep them around and keep them as an employee for another 5 hours. It was always uncertain, which is much more like our time, and I think it will be increasingly so, increasingly uncertain going into the future. So that's why it's good to use Louis as an example for that. Another reason why you should use Education of a Wandering Man and read it frequently within the preparation is because it will improve your writing and storytelling. If you're in the preparation, we urge you to start a Substack and start writing weekly updates about what you managed to do, what you managed to learn, what you managed to accomplish. And part of that is to hold yourself accountable. But part of that also is to attract people to you, especially if you're young, to attract people who want to aid you, to have them come your way and offer you potential opportunities. And you are going to get many more opportunities if you're a better writer than you probably currently are, especially if you can tell a good story. If you can tell a good story, you will be much more persuasive. You will be able to recount the things you've done or things you've learned in a much more interesting way, and in a way where you will actually learn more about what you have learned because you are forced to, and you have the ability to explain it well. And when you're reading Louis L'Amour, who became a fantastic writer after trying and failing so many times, but also after garnering lots of stories throughout his life that were worth telling. If you read Education of a Wandering Man, or even read his westerns, you will get a better understanding of what good storytelling looks like and how you should actually be writing. That's why you should read this. Because I know, and I've done this plenty of times when posting these weekly updates, I feel the urge to just take the easy way out and just kind of list off what I did each week and give a brief explanation. But you should go into detail. You should. If you go into detail, people are going to be more interested in what you have to say. They'll pay more attention. They'll be drawn into it more. And like I said, if you have the ability and you to write well and you put forth the effort to write better, to explain things better, you will actually force yourself to do more research about what you're learning, and you'll learn more in consequence while trying to explain it to other people. So it's a win-win overall if you can be if you can write persuasively and be a good storyteller, but also force yourself to write better, become a good storyteller, and force yourself to learn more about what you're learning about. You'll get quite a lot out of it. Now, going back to a point I briefly stated earlier, but it's difficult to explain. It requires a bit more thought and intention in how I kind of put this. But the book enriches your life if you're reading it, or at least the perspective that you'll gain from reading the book while you're going through the preparation will enrich your life. The changes in perspective will allow you to look at life in a much different way. I think as you meet more interesting people or modern day Renaissance men, you'll get a better picture of this because you'll be able to see what their lives have been actually like. If you meet them, they'll tell you directly, and you'll hear about the mistakes, the regrets, and the failures, and the major character faults that they have as well. When you're starting off in the preparation, let's say you have 0 and 1. 0 is where you're starting off from. 1 is a moderate amount of experience. When you're at 0, you have a childlike view of the world, or at least more of a childlike view of the world, where you can look at these interesting stories of great men and admire them to such a degree that they seem godlike. And while they are great and they are kind of like demigods in the way that some of them could walk through life, accomplish so much, and handle themselves in the way they did, it you can take it too far. Starting at 0, you're going to take it too far with that childlike view because you can't fully process the natural difficulties, the natural suffering that comes with life, the natural mistakes that you're going to make, um, even the mistakes that Socrates or Ben Franklin or Kit Carson or Louis, for that matter, would have made. You can't process it in the same way. So as you're reading Education of a Wandering Man several times throughout the preparation, you can watch your shift in perspective and see that, you know, analyzing it along with the mistakes you will likely make and failures you will likely have, regrets you will unfortunately build along the way. Hopefully, hopefully you'll limit that. You'll be able to look at it, your own experience, yourself, and other people who have lived interesting lives with a new kind of understanding. An understanding that is is beautiful because you see the mistakes and the failures in their full light. You see the full scope of difficulty that life brings, and just the fact that even if people are striving to do great things, to truly improve themselves, to be more virtuous and capable men, you do fall short. And like I said, it's hard to process that the shortcomings of people and yourself in the early stages. So going along in the preparation and gaining the new perspective that you will gain, you can you can also gain an enriching view of life because you'll see life in a more wholesome way. And I mean wholesome, not in like a, people baking bread in a cottage kind of way, but in an all-encompassing way. You can see life in its not in its full form, but in a much more whole way where you can see the difficulties, you can see the good and the bad and process it all and understand it all and not be disappointed or brought down by those things. Because you too, at that point, will have made mistakes, just as Louis L'Amour did, just as Ben Franklin did, or Kit Carson, or Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Teddy Roosevelt, you name it. All of them made plenty of mistakes. So, 3 things. Use it as a gauge of success, or progress is a better word. Use it to improve your writing and storytelling. I would also recommend reading Hemingway as part of that because if you read Hemingway, you get an idea of what it's like to write in a more blunt fashion, where you're still getting the story across, but you're leaving out the fluff. I think that's what Hemingway did. And number 3, it enriches life, and that's number 1 and number 3 are kind of coupled together, where the perspective shifts you are going to inevitably have over the next 4 years that you're in the preparation, or however long you have, will be a measure of your success or a measure of your progress, but it'll also allow you to gain a more uh, enriched view of life, a more beautiful view of life, more interesting and true view of life. So, anyway, I highly recommend The Education of a Wandering Man, and I hope this has been something that you guys have enjoyed. I like making these videos, actually. It forces me to become a better speaker as well, because I definitely need to improve with that. But if you're not already a paid subscriber, I do want to mention this because I think I have a fair amount of good paid content for you guys. You should become a paid subscriber. It's $10 a month, or $100 a year. If you want to become a founding member of this Substack page, it's $250, and that's it. And that would mean quite a lot. Once you do become a paid subscriber, you get access to 2 full years of weekly updates within the preparation. The last 2 years, you get up all of those updates. You get to see all of what I've done. You get to read all of that, but also you will get access to all of the paid subscriber only videos and articles, essays that I put out, which will be related to the preparation and a lot of the ideas within it, and lessons I've learned, things I've done. You'll hear about all of that, and I'm sure going into the future, the topics will branch out into other areas as well. So anyway, I want to mention that because I think it's important to become a paid subscriber, especially if you're in the preparation, because I'll be producing a lot of content that I think will be very, very useful to you. Like I said, describing some of the lessons I've learned so I can help you avoid the pitfalls, the natural pitfalls or mistakes that I have made throughout the last 2 years. But anyway, I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.